May we please be seated if we may? I think we can start.
Yes. Sorry. He doesn't stop.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. By getting back to internet freedom business, my name is Sandy Chimpala, and I am a technology blogger and digital rights activist from Zambia. And right now, the session that we're about to get into is talking about the economic and social impact of social media taxes. On the panel with me today, from my left, going further up, is Brock Raidman from Research ICT Africa, Kamal Afanyon from ISF, which is Internet Sans Frontiers. I hope I said that correctly. I also have Dr. Wairagala Wakabi from CIPESA. And lastly, Kojo Boakie from Facebook. The background to this session is that recently Uganda made a decision to tax the use of social media applications, and that's one of the first of its kind in Africa. But we've also seen other countries do the same thing. We've seen Tanzania as well as the Democratic Republic of Congo and my country, Zambia, attempting to do the same thing. Now, there have been concerns about this, saying that the cost of such a tax on the nationals' rights, politically exercising their rights of freedom to expression, their social, civil freedoms of association and opinion might be inhibited. So to discuss this further, I think I'll start with Brock Bergman. What do you think are the social and economic implications of this? What has Research ICT Africa found out about the impact of social media taxes?
Thanks, Sandy. We've initially incorporated our analysis on this issue within our study of the household level internet access and use measures that we've conducted in as a household survey, our after access household survey, across 7 different African countries, including Uganda. It's actually gone up to 10 countries now. And from this data, we were able to understand better who accesses the internet, how they do it, what are their preferred devices, and what levels of activity do they conduct, what's the intensity of use, and particularly what activities they conduct. And it's interesting to note that across all countries that we've conducted this survey in, it's almost unilaterally applicable where social media use is equal to internet use. Internet use is often a lot lower than countries represented to be, but at the same time, if, for example, a country represents its internet users and the population of internet users as X%, social media use is very close, 1 or 2% below that. And the correlation means that when social media taxes are applied, or even mobile money taxes, or any taxes of the OTT platform are applied, it ends up having a negative effect not just on the updating one's Facebook status. It's got a negative consequence for people who use the internet to do that, and therefore it's become an important proxy for measuring not just what people do on the internet, but also how much they use the internet. So when policies are implemented that obstruct people's access to social, it's going to find more ways to do that. And this is not necessarily always the best way to do things. And so we challenge the notion that this is a good idea. The way that we do this is we try to ask what costs come about. If this is your stated intention and the policymaker or the regulator or whichever authority predicts that they're going to make a benefit or have a beneficial contribution to the well-being of society, then at what cost does that come, and does the expected benefit outweigh the possible costs? And so when we take a magnifying glass to what these costs are, we have to understand the three possible scenarios. That is, if the claim to implement social media mobile money taxes is to improve the tax base of the economy and to improve public revenue streams, then we're going to try to influence that policy by speaking that language and saying, well, hopefully, due to the elasticity of demand, you're going to have to offset what you gain in public taxes from what you lose in people being able to access data services. Now, we know that's a very fragile market that we're talking about. In Uganda alone, there are not even 50% of people who have access to a mobile phone. There's less than 20% of them, in fact, 14% of them that use the internet and 12% that use social media. Only 16% have access to a smartphone. So we're talking about a market that is small, that needs to grow, and we're talking about people that are looking to and hoping to allocate a certain amount of their income to spend on accessing social media and the internet. So when we try to improve the tax revenue streams and we try to grow them, we've got to look at where that money is coming from, in addition to the rights costs that are implied. And this is where it gets interesting, is that even if we can justify, and we can talk more about this, but in the first scenario, even if you're able to justify that in some bizarre world, your tax, the money you would accrue in taxes would outweigh what it costs in demand. Firstly, I'd like to live in that world, but even if it did, you would still be impinging on people's rights to access information, to use that information in forming opinions, to share those opinions online, and many other socioeconomic benefits that come with the efficiencies of conducting one's life in an internet economy and participating in an information society. So with that in mind, even if there was some financial gain for the national fiscus from this exercise, it still wouldn't be able to trump the importance of as many people being online as possible and the rights that they would enjoy from exercising their activities and their interests online. In the second scenario, we imagine the possibility that the money that's accrued in tax revenue sort of cancels out whatever is lost through private demand. So the operators aren't making as much money because there's been people have behaved accordingly, and because they can't afford to pay these taxes, they simply don't put themselves online. But the loss from that would be offset by the taxes from the people who are paying. In that scenario, you sit with more than just a rights infringement. You also sit with with a sector that is struggling to grow, where you're struggling to get people online, and you're actively imposing obstacles on users. And in that environment, not only are in our financial analysis, the operators might not lose as much revenue since they would just pass on these taxes to their users, but they still wouldn't be growing their revenue as fast as they would like, and that restraint on their revenue generation means that they're unable to invest in their networks, extend their networks, improve the quality of their networks. So there's a consequence for the sector. Additionally, you're losing a whole number of users who can't afford these taxes. We can get into those numbers just now in the third scenario. But it's important to notice that even if, in our minds, the best case scenario where you come out breaking even, you're still infringing on people's rights, plus you're losing a bit of money in the sector, and you're not allowing the ICT sector to play the instrumental role that Research ICT Africa believes it can and should be playing, especially in markets where it isn't very strong. We know that it only contributes 2.2% to the national GDP, so that's something that warrants perhaps some extra attention and not the imposing of all these taxes. In the third and final scenario, which is the most likely of these scenarios, is that due to the relative poverty of Ugandan citizens and the tight wallets that exist in that country, and this goes for many countries, many African countries, the elasticity of demand is very high. So people are not in a position to stretch their very, very limited income to pay for these additional taxes. Which means that you're going to be cutting off a very significant part of the population who are lucky enough to still be using the internet, even if it's not optimally, given that 52% don't have mobile phones and 86% don't have access to the internet. Those are the numbers you should be looking at and considering when you're imposing a tax. But for the 14% that are on the internet, half of them are going to struggle to pay this, at least. So that in that scenario, you're going to cut off a whole lot of people that you should be trying to keep online. So for those three scenarios, we just struggle to believe that this is an exercise in improving the public revenue streams, and we could talk about the other argument of, well, then what is the actual intention? What is the stated goal of trying to implement these taxes? Why would any policy be implemented that's effectively going to run people off the internet? And we can have a debate about that.
Thanks, Brock. Moving on to Kamal, you work for basically Internet Without Borders, and social media taxes should probably infringe on those borders. There's something there that's not right with the kind of work that you do. What do you think the social media taxes will do for an economy like Africa, where we have low penetration of mobile internet phones, where just a few people are trying to get online now, the economies are not as robust as we'd want them to be? So what are the implications of having something like a social media tax placed upon the few citizens that are actually accessing the internet?
Thank you for the question. So at Internet Sans Frontières, we're very concerned about the situation, the ongoing situations in Zambia, in Uganda, and in Benin, because recently the government decided to put this tax on the social media. The thing is that in Benin we have already 2 submarine cables, but the price of internet is already high. The price is high for a country connected to 2 submarine cables, and at the same time the quality of the service sometimes it's very weak, so it can be improved. And when the government decided to put this tax, we were very quick to write a note that we sent to the press, and we clearly stated that this is going to have a negative social impact on the population. And then we started the dialogue, because we knew that it's going to be very bad for the economy. The government actually is trying to put in place a digital economy. That's what they are saying since a moment. And then we started the dialogue to show them that it can be feasible likewise. And so we started the process together with a group of NGOs in Benin. And at the same time, the population also were using internet, to show the feeling
with the hashtag.
Exactly. So this hashtag actually tax pas mes mégaoctets. In English, it's do not tax my megabyte. So the internet users were intensively using this hashtag. At the same time, there were also an online petition, for a while. So the people started to put pressure on the government. And a few days ago, we were very happy to see that the government decided to cancel this tax, which is good for the democracy in Benin. And we are still following the situation in the other countries to see, because in Zambia and in Uganda, people also were very concerned about the new taxes. They show that they were not happy to pay more for internet, and we are still following the situation, trying to analyze what's going on. Actually, people are using VPN now, so it's a way. So the government is trying to make money, but at the same time, those guys are able to escape from this strategy, to take money from them actually. So we are analyzing this situation, following what is going on actually, and because we think that it's important to start the dialogue with the government, in different countries who want to launch a digital economy. And who work for integrations, because if you start to put those taxes and you think about new model of economy, you think about political integration, it will never work. So that's what we're currently doing at ESF. Yeah.
All right. Very informative, and congratulations to Benin for having that cancelled. Dr. Wakabi, on the ground, what have you seen from your own country happening with the social media tax? What's changed so far?
Thank you. I should ask Kamal first to say, was the tax in Benin actually scrapped, or it was modified or suspended?
Cancelled.
For the moment, the tax is suspended. And what we saw is that the government decided to put, because the decree who tried to put this tax was cancelled, suspended, and then the government is trying to put to measurize the price for the education fees. So that's the new law that we saw now. So they are trying to modify the price if you would like to attend the university. So it's probably going to be also like discussed, and we will see what will happen.
Thank you. So it appears to me that in Uganda, as in Benin and Zambia, the governments are introducing these taxes without doing any sorts of studies to inform these decisions. They are also introducing these taxes without carrying out any consultations that should reasonably be carried out with other stakeholders such as civil society and private sector actors before they reach them. Because if they were carrying out studies to inform them of the social and economic impacts of the introduction of these taxes, then it's likely that they would either not introduce them at all, or they wouldn't introduce them in the forms in which they have so far introduced them. In Uganda, the tax was introduced on July 1st, so it's been it's about 3 months now. The economists who did all the calculations came up with numbers saying the government was taking the wrong decision to introduce the taxes the way they were being introduced. I'll give you some figures, and then there have already been some early results. For the first month when the tax was introduced, the government collected 4.7 billion shillings. I don't know what that is in Uganda shillings. That's not the issue. If the government continues at that monthly rate, it's going to get a total of 56 billion shillings from the social media tax in 1 year. When the president issued the directive for this tax to be introduced, he said we are going to raise about 400 billion per year. So 400 billion is what the president, in his wisdom, and I don't think that he has done any studies, because he didn't reference any studies, thought would raise. Against, if we were to go with the figure for the first month, they would raise 56, which is just about over 1/8 of what the projections were. But there's been a study which was done, and the results were released last month, which show that with the current tax rates on social media, Uganda could lose billions of shillings. I'll get the figure here. 100 and yeah, it would lose 400 billion in foregone 2.8 trillion foregone GDP growth, and 400 billion in taxes per year. Okay, the point being that social media is a driver of business efficiency, is a driver of all sorts of small businesses that operate online or from geographical areas that are difficult to reach, but they are able to conduct their business through the use of social media. All those enablers are taken away when social media is taxed. So the revenues, both from telecom operators, but from businesses whose operations are enabled by social media, seem like something which the government has not factored in when they were reaching the decision to introduce this tax. I'll say one last thing, which is sort of connected, but may not be directly connected. When Uganda introduced the social media tax, Uganda also introduced, what is it called? Yes, taxes on mobile money, yeah? Sending and withdrawing. Telecom operators, of course, said this is not sensible to do, knowing as we do the role of mobile money in financial inclusion, in enabling business operations and efficiencies for all sorts of small and medium enterprises and the biggest number of people in our country. Government came up and said they are going to remove the tax on withdrawing, so it's only on sending. Yesterday, MTN, which is the biggest operator in Uganda, said since they introduced this tax, the volumes that they transact have gone down by 27%. That tells you something about the effect also that this social media tax is going to have, not only on these companies, but on the broader macroeconomic indicators.
Thank you, Dr. Wakabi. Kojo, you are representing Facebook, and speaking specifically for my country, we are having a tax which is basically going about voice over internet calls. So that's affecting Viber, WhatsApp, Facebook in Messenger. But then what is your stance as Facebook towards extra costs being incurred by the user for using their platform? Because as I understand it, it's supposed to be that we pay for the data we use or the Wi-Fi connectivity, but the service, the platform, is free to download.
I mean, our position is going to be pretty clear as a company, and also I think our position is made clear from the ethos of the company, which in my view has been and will be for the considerable future a commitment to helping this continent develop and helping to get people online. So we don't think these taxes work, but I wanted to start with actually repositioning this and actually commending the government of Uganda and the government of Benin for a couple of things. I think we're in the midst of considerable change. One is a change in the telecoms or ICT sector as we see it. And what we've seen is we've largely used voice and SMS to contact people, our loved ones, and to do business. And I think the rise of apps like WhatsApp and Facebook has changed that considerably. And as you say, people now use their data package to access these services and use these services. And the revenue that governments gained from voice and SMS and the tax paid on that has, to some extent, and in some countries it differs, but has reduced. And in the midst of that change, governments have seen a hole in their fiscal revenue and decided to make a decision. And you started this panel by suggesting that Uganda had followed the policies elsewhere. And in fact, the reason why I commend Uganda is actually because it's the first country to have taken a step. I'm not going to say it's the right step because I don't believe it is, and I think we've eloquently, each of these panelists has spoken about the negative impacts of this particular step, but I do think it's brave to have taken a step in the midst of this. I also have to commend the government of Benin for taking that step, but for then realizing, looking at the evidence, listening to its people, then realizing 3 days later that this doesn't work. And for both those reasons, I think government should be commended. Our position, though, and the evidence speaks to the fact that taxing OTT use and stopping people from accessing these services is actually detrimental to the company in the short term, in the medium term, and 100% without doubt in the long term. And I think Brock, Kamal, and Doctor have spoken about the impacts we saw. In Benin, for those of you who don't know, the government decided to place a tax on OTT use, which meant that if you wanted to use WhatsApp, you bought a particular package, and that package was actually 10 times more expensive than normal internet. In Uganda, the understanding was that if you placed a 5 cents per day, the equivalent of 5 cents per day, 200 shillings or 5 cents per day tax on use, and stopped people accessing those services, or that stopped people accessing those services, most people who were deemed to be people who could afford to access those services would have no problem paying. And I think this is where the assumptions are wrong. I think in Zambia we've seen the same, that if we put 3 cents per day, I think that this is the suggestion, Sandy, if we put 3 cents per day on a VoIP call, those who use the internet are rich enough or well off enough to pay for access. And actually that's not true. And what we're seeing is that despite the fact that this continent only has 21% of people using the internet, many poor people still use the internet. And in fact, 5 cents per day, 3 cents per day, or even when it's extraordinary, like 10 times more expensive, is going to stop those people using the internet. So it's no wonder that in Uganda we've seen a 27% drop in mobile money, which is a consequence of that tax. But I would argue, and the data's not there yet, that we're going to see a 30-40% drop in data use. If you look at the average spend of an MTN consumer in Uganda, it's about $2.70 per month. All their ICT use. So that's SMS, data, and voice. If you look at someone and ask them to pay the tax every day, it's $1.70 per month. So the tax is essentially 70%, just under 70% of their total spend and on ICT use, and you're going to see it fall. I think the stat that Doctor was looking for when he spoke about shillings can be put into dollars. And already the research shows that as a consequence of the tax, and as a consequence of the fall in demand for that tax, Uganda is likely to see $737 million wiped off its GDP this year. Again, projections. But also as a consequence of that tax, and again, I think Doctor spoke to it ever so well, we're going to see inflationary pressure. And I think the analysis suggests that we're seeing inflationary pressure as a result, because everything is essentially driven by ICT use, as Doctor said. So I think the negative impact is very clear. I do think, though, that the brave decisions taken, as I mentioned before, are a result of an existing phenomenon, and a painful one for mobile operators, some mobile operators, and I think there's now increasing evidence that mobile operators are making more money than they ever made before through the sale of data. And in fact, those companies, and I can mention some like MTN and like Airtel, who have decided that their future strategies will be 3 and 4G, will continue making money by selling data. But I think some mobile operators who are concentrating on voice and SMS still, and those revenues will continue to suffer. But I think it's painful for governments, some governments, it's painful for some operators. But I think our position is that this is not the solution. Taxing it in this way is not the solution. And I think there are a number of other models that are arising that around the world that may be better models, but taxing OTT use in general and stopping people accessing it isn't the right model in this case, in my view, in our view.
Thank you. Before I ask the next question, are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very great points. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I am in the human rights field, so I do not agree with what I'm about to say myself. However, you speak about the negative effects of the tax, but I'm trying to put it as politically correct as possible. We agree that OTTs have impacted the economies of African governments horribly. Do you think taxing OTTs could be part of the solution, instead of taxing the users, taxing the Facebooks and the WhatsApps and so on? To another point, we speak about the negative financial impacts. Currently, governments are taxing the main social media platforms, so Facebook, Twitter, and so on. But those are not the only ones. Do you think there is a possibility that those taxes could have a positive impact on the local initiatives of the local social media platforms that have absolutely no chance of existing at the moment? They can't compete with the Facebooks of this world and the Googles and so on. So do you think that's a possibility that taxing those would force people to go and look for alternative solutions that are locally bred or how? This is all still financial. Can we also look at the social implications and the social repercussions of those platforms? We're not going to again, it's not, Facebook is not the problem, WhatsApp and so on, but the social media platforms, the social impacts those platforms have had on populations that have a very low level of literacy. Do you think that taxing those platforms and making it inaccessible to people who are accessing the internet for the first time and now can no longer access those platforms and are no longer victims of fake news campaigns that have had horrible impacts in Myanmar and so on? So do you think that's a positive thing? Oh, and again, I do not agree with any of this. It's just
It's great
for the sake of the debate.
They're great questions.
Any other?
Thank you. My name is Martha, and my question goes to the gentleman. Sorry, I came late, so I didn't get your name. You were speaking about the protest in Benin. I followed the sit-in protest online as well as the campaign online, and your government announced that they're not going to go through with the tax. In my country, the president has said, look, the tax is going ahead. People have expressed online that you're taxing us too much. It's still going ahead. So what is the role of a citizen like myself, who's just a user, where I'm told whether you like it or not, this law is going to pass, you will be taxed? How else do I engage other than protesting? And even though I express my displeasure at what my government is doing, they still go ahead and implement the tax. What else can I do besides protesting, even when it's not heard? So from a practical perspective, I would really like to learn from others, because it's happening in my country at the moment. Thank you.
Maybe we can take those two questions. Anyone on the panel?
I can try on the first one. And there was a couple of parts to the first, which I know that the gentleman doesn't believe in. I think the first thing is just to correct and clarify something, is that I don't think OTTs have had a horrible impact on the economies of these countries. I think there's a transition the industry goes through where people are now beginning to use data, even here in Ghana, beginning to use data to make calls when they would have used a voice call. And I think that transition takes time, but I think the overall impact of OTT use is actually positive on GDP, and actually I don't think we do a good enough story of telling it, but positive on social aspects as well. And I think we need to do a better story of telling about that impact. On the side of, on the question of local apps and local services, I 100% agree, and I think hopefully we've done a bit more on this continent than, and many of you know about it, in terms of developing app developers and developing industry. And I think some of the work we do in Nigeria and elsewhere with the development of hubs highlights that we have a huge belief in the development of local services. I don't think, though, that cutting off access to services that people enjoy now and people use now to contact loved ones, to make money, to do whatever, is the way to nurture local services. I disagree with that. And I had this conversation with a couple of policymakers, and this isn't hyperbole, this is us just thrashing it out, and it's part of the reason why I'm here. I'm here to listen and here to learn as well, and I do that when I have discussions. I told those policymakers that in that environment, if you introduce a tax as a form of protectionism in the current geopolitical environment, what does that mean for the future? And I'll use Mark as an example, but if the future Zambian Mark, Beninese Mark, Ghanaian Mark that might be developing a successful app that they could take from wherever they are to Europe, to Asia, or to America, if Africa seems to be driving protectionism of their apps developers, I think you see reciprocity growing in terms of trade at a global level now. So I don't think that's the answer to that. I think doing the things that Facebook is doing, which is to invest in developers and to invest in the infrastructure that will help those developers reach their local markets and then their regional markets and then their international markets, is the way to do it. And in fact, one of the reasons why Uganda, in our view, was such a kick in the teeth for us as a company, and why we still remained fiercely committed to Uganda, one of the reasons why it was painful to see Uganda become the first country in the world to do it, is because we had invested in, alongside partners, Airtel and BCS, in developing that infrastructure for Uganda. So we rolled out 760 kilometers of fiber in northern Uganda, where operators told us there was demand, but only enough demand for them to put up 75 3G or 4G cell sites. In the end, we rolled out that cable in less than 6 months in northern Uganda, thanks to the policy environment at the time. And the operators have now installed more than 150 cell sites. And what you're seeing is business generated. App developers who are Ugandan and content providers who are Ugandan suddenly having a market in northern Uganda when they didn't have it. And I think what you want to do is develop policy environments that drive that kind of investment from companies like ours and others. That's what I think you want to do, not protectionism.
Yeah, I also want to take a stab at that question because I think it's important in like a panel discussion like this to listen to devil's advocates. Sometimes if we all get in a big enough group, we all end up in the same ideological corner. Someone's going to be brave, step out, jump over the line just to keep the debate going. Hopefully there were a few policymakers here we could have the debate with. But instead of feeling like we're preaching to the choir, talking to the converted, let's answer these devil's advocate questions. And it was a good one too. Because if we continue to talk about and recognize the development of a knowledge economy, reaping the benefits of having an information society, trying to enjoy network benefits, and believing that social media and mobile money and these over-the-top platforms contribute strongly to that, like our data says, by far the most common conducted internet activity is social media. 77% of our respondents said that they do that. The next closest was teaching themselves education and upskilling their careers. That was 45%. So social media is like a big part of internet activity. In recognition of that, and in recognition of how much it can offer people within an economy, I, for one, personally would not answer the question until we establish how are we going to tax these social media companies and platforms. So on a practical level, no, don't do it. But in principle, I think if they're contributing to the economy, people are making revenue off of these platforms and thereby participating in the economy that these platforms help to uphold, and they're benefiting in turn. At some level, there's going to be a tax, right? Operators get taxed, users get taxed. Someone's going to get taxed at some point. But to just impose these regulations ad hoc and to be a little too brave, I think, is not necessarily something we should be supporting. However, having said that, in a devil's advocate sort of way, we've seen how some local app developers or content creators can suffer when there are such media giants out there. And it's when you've got the capability to develop something that's zero-rated and that has plays an important contributing factor to how people get online. If someone's first experience to the internet is accessing, for example, Wikipedia without any data cost, perhaps it'll stimulate their interest and they'll be intrigued to find out more about the internet, and in some way zero-rated services can play a gateway function when it comes to getting people online. And in countries where, I can't even remember the name of Wikipedia that's been zero-rated, but Free Basics, for example, where that's been successful, some local apps developers are just not incentivized to try and create their own social media platform. So social networking can somewhat be monopolized in that sector. I wouldn't necessarily look at it that way, but I do think that in that space there might be an argument to be made for stimulating local content creation, especially when you look at some of the chief constraints in enhancing internet access and reducing digital inequality is giving people A, the means to access it, B, the means to afford the access, and C, things that they want to access. They don't necessarily all want to be consuming content that was created in Europe and in the US. We want stuff that's from our own countries. So the more that we can stimulate that, the better. and maybe if that tax can help incentivize that, we'll consider it. But until we actually see what it's going to look like, just slapping it onto the operators, knowing that they're going to pass it directly onto the consumer, and thereby restrict a greater portion of the population from accessing social media, it's just ludicrous.
Can I just add to that?
I want to have a jab at you first, then you can. Because I agree. I think we do need to commend the Benin government for trying something and then walking it back once there was involvement from civil society. But as Research ICT Africa researches policy and regulation quite a bit more than anything else, and one of the things we like to contend with the most is the initiatives that particularly African governments feel that they need to take in trying to direct the economy or trying to direct society. And I don't think we're short of courage on the African continent. There's some pretty brazen leaders out there who perhaps could attend a panel like this or attend a FIF Africa at some point. So I would personally resist from commending the Uganda government too quickly, because the virtue of forbearance in policy making, I think, is understated. Sometimes the right thing to do is to do nothing at all, because we don't have the information available, we don't have the capacity to implement it properly, we run the risk of keeping people offline, and the opportunity costs that come with that are 700 billion. So before rushing into something, I wouldn't agree with that commendation to the Ugandan government. But please, I'd like to hear a response.
And maybe I need to clarify when I say commend. I think commend for the bravery of the decision. I don't think the decision should be commended because it's the wrong decision and lacked evidence and built on flawed assumptions. But I think as you struggle in what is clearly a change in policy environment, a change in business environment, I think there is bravery in taking a decision. But we would predict and call for forbearance, we would call for better consultation processes than we have, and we would call for any decision. So the bravery part is important, but any decision to be built on strong evidence and of what the impact might be.
Can I just quickly, to the issue of whether blocking access to these sites would be good for development of local solutions? I don't think so, because innovation only thrives when there is unfettered access to information. If you are going to restrict what kind of information your developers and citizens have, then they are not going to be able to innovate. But also, if you look at countries such as Tanzania this year has started basically taxing online content producers. They've licensed 146 as of July. If you are going to do anything like web streaming, even on Facebook, if you are going to do a blog, a simple blog, you have to pay money and you have to get a license, which license can be withdrawn by the Tanzania Communication Regulatory Authority. In that kind of environment, there is no way you are going to say that these governments are going to support local innovation or create an environment where innovators thrive when they are taxing even something as basic as a blog. Let me answer briefly a question which was raised by this gentleman. I think there are some sectors of our countries normally we don't understand the use of technology and the impacts of this action, such as increasing taxes. We had a dialogue in Uganda a few months ago. Kojo here was in attendance. We had a gentleman from he leads an organization of people with hearing disabilities. No, he's actually, he was born, I think, when he can't see. So he has an organization of PWDs that he leads. So this gentleman spoke to us about the effects of, one, the social media tax, and two, the mobile money tax. Before these taxes were introduced, life was easy for someone like him and the constituencies that he's a member of. you could easily do transactions online, but now the key has to go to the bank physically. There are no ramps in the banks, but he has to incur a cost to go there along with a guide. They have WhatsApp groups which serve members of the PWD community. According to him, many members of this community are actually low-income earners because it's difficult for them to get education or to get employment. These WhatsApp groups were serving a very big purpose in terms of informing them and mobilizing, but now they can't use them because they basically can't afford the money to be able to stay online. There are also very many other groups like that in rural areas, poor women and, rural youth. And what is clear is that these taxes actually hurt mostly people with low incomes. So many of them obviously will stop using any kind of digital technologies, but also their lives and livelihoods really take a hit from the beginning.
Thanks. Any questions? Wow.
There was one question related to the case in Benin, so I will answer briefly. The question was, what can be done when my voice is not heard? So indeed, there was like a lot of protest in Benin. The same was also in Uganda, in Zambia. But the thing is that actually we have institutions in Benin who works in a more democratic way. And the thing is that we are going to have election this year. So we'll have a parliamentary election in 2019. And in 2021, we will elect a new president. And the government knows that nowadays people use social media to communicate. So they share ideas, they debate on pressing issues. And in our case, we have those institutions who sometimes are balanced, and I think they were able to realize that if they didn't listen to the people, they could lose the elections, because comparing to authoritarian regime, in our case, for example, the president, Patrice Talon, when he came to power, he said he will stay only 5 years. He tried to modify the constitution, he failed, and now he would like to come back for a second term. And he knows that if he doesn't listen to the youth, he can lose the election. So that's also played an important role in the organization of civil societies and the whole process. So people were able to coordinate, they were able to protest, as I mentioned, the tax my megabyte, also this online petition. So they realized that the people were putting a lot of pressure on them. And I guess that the election in that case played also an important role, because they definitely know that they can lose the election, and then that's why they, I guess, decided to listen to the people.
Okay, so because of time, I'm only going to take 2 questions from this gentleman and maybe a woman. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter. I'm from Zambia, and I work with the bloggers of Zambia. And I again would like to commend the civil society in Benin and every other person that fought that fight. But for me, I think it's about the reason why our government decided to introduce the voice on internet calls. And the reason was that they want to save the telecommunication companies from going down, because many people are then moving to that sector to access cheap calls. And for me, that is pretty much unfounded, and I find it a reason just to raise taxes. And when I did the math, out of a population of 16,000, only about 2,000 people are using internet. And if you tax them 3 cents per day, they make about $50,000, which in a year they will make $18.25. And which money we don't know how and where it is going. And this, and the second thing is that and
I would be surprised. I would be surprised to hear that any company, mobile company, wanted to share some revenue from services with us. And to be frank, Facebook would never do that.
Yeah, because there are no mechanisms, first of all, to do that. And maybe lastly, it's also an issue of innovation. So if you are going to tax people to save a certain sector, then you're not allowing for innovation. You're not allowing for growth in that sector. Why can't we then allow other people who are able to provide the same service but at a cheaper rate and also with quality to begin to do that? It also reminds me the issue of mobile money. Right now, there's a lot of penetration in terms of mobile money usage in Zambia as well. Airtel just announced that they made massive profits within this year and last year. But what that has done is that it has forced the government to ask banks to reduce their service fees on their accounts. Secondly, we are looking at a scenario where we hope they reduce lending rates as well. That is giving room to innovation because banks are not able to meet and provide the services that mobile money services are able to meet, and they have a customer base. So for me, it's an issue of having an understanding of where the government is coming from, and one thing that we could think about is open dialogue. But when you have a regime that is close to dialogue and only wants to implement laws through a statutory instrument, which in most cases has no parliament approval, then that begins to be a problem.
So Peter, just for your benefit, what I would say, and Brock and I may speak after about the bravery of a decision and whether it should be commended or not. I think this is again another example of a government that does see a revenue hole from the previous, and I think we can also sit here and say, yeah, this is innovation, this has to move on, and this. But there are things that many governments believe they will want to pay for out of the revenue, and they see a hole there. The other thing I would say, and I think we have to appreciate that as you enter into dialogue. The other thing I would say as well, and I can't tell Martha and the Zambian people how to approach this, but I would say that there are pronouncements from governments often that sometimes, in our view, don't always outline exactly how they feel. And in each case, whether it be the government of Benin, the government of Uganda, or the government of Zambia, I do think there has been room for some form of dialogue in there, and that dialogue has been helpful in enabling stakeholders like Facebook, like CEPESA, like I can't remember the private sector association in Badu's, has been helpful in enabling them to explain this transition that's happening, to explain that many mobile operators are actually making more revenue than they've ever made before by selling data, and if you tax on revenue or you tax on profit, you're actually going to make the same, if not more, and to explain some of the consequences. And we had colleagues, and you'll see in your paper today, I've come from Zambia just now. There is open room for dialogue and for that to be explained. And Zictor and the minister have been very open that they're open for dialogue. So I would say that. I think Facebook can't tell people how to protest and whatever else. And I think people are well within their rights to go about and do that, go around and do that. And I think there are forms of protest. I think if we can take anything from Kamal's example, is that there seems to have been room for protest, but also for Kamal and other organizations to explain exactly what the impact is, to impress that upon government that not just, we don't want this, but actually this will be the impact on innovation, on the economy, on all kinds of things. And I think we have to get to a place as well where, in recognition of this hole that exists, we need to start having a dialogue about how that hole is filled. Does that make sense? So what are the alternatives? I don't think you can just tell governments to just, you can't do it. I think you need to also present some alternatives where they exist or where they don't even exist now, but it has to be room for dialogue to discuss potential alternatives. No, not to say. I'm just saying he has been desperate. Maybe we had two.
Okay, I had more of a comment to respond to the sister about what we can do as citizens. And just as a background, I do research both on ICT and both on tax. So I think it's worth looking at the motivations behind increasing taxes on social media. If we look at Uganda, for example, they called it the gossip tax, meaning that it's looking at curbing what they see as a social ill of gossiping. So the motivation behind that was to reprice what they think, doing less of this social ill. But in Kenya, because they've taxed 15% on everything, on fuel, on kerosene, on chocolate, on communication, on data, it's just about generating revenue, because the IMF says that you can increase your budget deficit, you can get more loans, you can just tax the poor. So the motivation around Kenya is just to get more money to finance the Big Four agenda. So what we've been telling people, I mean, especially for governments that overly tax the common man, is that you're looking at the wrong place. It's much easier, and government authorities will say it's so much easier to just tax intermediaries, to just tax VAT, indirect taxes on everyone, however much you earn. But if we point out, actually, a lot of people aren't paying their tax. So Uganda, for example, went to court with Heritage Oil because they were losing taxes, they were losing capital gains tax. And because of that, Uganda was able to get back all the money that they're losing because of they're not paying capital gains tax. A lot of internet companies, especially the big ones, Facebook, IBM, Google, they're all registered in Ireland so that they can evade tax. So it's just worth noting that there is income, and it shouldn't be generated from the poor. It should be generated from the people who are trying to avoid paying tax. Big multinationals, yeah.
Thank you. Can we take a last question?
You can take your last question, and then I'll have a comment for
Okay.
the
Who
lady.
had their hand up first? Which one? Him? Okay. Sorry, guys.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one, and is to Kojo, if that's right, our colleague from Facebook. I just want to get it clear that you said you were commending the Ugandan government for making a wrong decision, or because I think it's important to get it clear.
Yeah,
recognizing
I wish
that,
I'd never said it now, but
yes, recognizing that you are from a technology company,
yeah.
And that usually you would not want to, step on the toes of governments because of the consequences and so on and so forth. So I just want to get it clear that you were commending the Ugandan government for the taxes, which you say is wrong. I think it's good to have it clear.
And I think I've just heard a lady there actually from Uganda say it was a figure of speech. I wish I'd never said it, because now Brock has had a jab and you've had a jab. I think what I meant is that there is pain and there is angst and there is gnashing of teeth at the moment because of these changes that we see. And I think trying to tackle the problem or recognizing the problem and trying to tackle it is the brave thing to do. And for that, you should be commended, to try and tackle a problem. I don't think, and we don't think, that the way this is being tackled is the right way to do it. So is that now clear? Or am I allowed to take back or withdraw my commend statement?
Too late.
And just leave it with Benin? Because I said I came here and hopefully I'm amongst friends, we can have a debate. This is certainly a debate. So I take that back and I'll say I'll commend Benin for thing. But I do think that the Ugandan government, and they were quite frank with us, and we've had engagement with them from before we made our investment there, and we'll continue. And they were quite frank with us that this is a challenge. So I think the recognizing the challenge and trying to tackle it is brave. I think the way they've gone about it is wrong. To the lady who spoke about Facebook and others trying to avoid tax, I think I have stock lines about, we pay tax in every country and wherever and whatever. And I could come out and reel those out to you. I won't reel those out to you. I will say, though, that we don't, in my view, and we can talk after, I don't think we try to avoid tax. And I think there are some assumptions, and I've said this clearly to people within the company and to many of the policymakers I meet, that I think we're not doing a good enough job of actually talking about how Facebook makes money, where it makes money, and even what our tax practices are. And I think there's assumption amongst many African governments when they hear that Facebook and whomever else makes this many billion in a quarter, that surely some of that money is, there are so many, I walk out in the streets of Kampala, in the streets of Cotonou, in the streets of Lusaka, everybody's using Facebook, so surely they're making money here. I think there's a misunderstanding, and I see this, that there's this view that we make some of our money from part of the call. We don't. And I think policymakers have a misunderstanding about that. I think we also don't do a good enough story of telling people how much money we make in Africa. And I can say amongst friends, hopefully it doesn't go further, that less than 0.5% of our revenue comes from Africa. And we actually invest much, much more in the infrastructure that I'm talking about, in the delivery of services, in the POPs, in the FNAs, in the developer circles than we make in this continent. And that's because we have a long-term view about this continent. And it's not a benevolent act, it's a business act. And we understand that if we invest, even though while we're losing money here, 5 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years from now, it will have a positive benefit on the company. But the last point I'll make about that, and this is one I make to policymakers, I'll be frank as well, is that there is an ongoing discussion globally about taxation of internet companies, as the lady has rightfully said. And my view is that if you want to be as African governments, we should be involved, our government should be involved in that conversation. But in my view, your part in that conversation will be more important and bigger the more people you have, or the more important this part of the world is to companies like mine. And I think if you stop people using services, whether it be Google services, Twitter, Facebook services, you reduce the number of people, I think your bargaining position in that global conversation is reduced as well. And I think that's something to consider.
Before we wind up, I would like you to give your closing remarks based on, basically, is social media tax worth it? Is this really about revenue making, or is this a way for most governments to suppress freedom, to suppress opinions online? Seeing as that's what mostly social media in the countries that have been affected are using it for. They're using it to express their opinions, they're using it as some form of political assembly online. So is it really about raising revenue or stopping people from speaking out on governance policies in the country? Is social media tax worth it?
Perfect question to finish. It's probably what the debate has been most about. And honestly, no, it's not. I don't think we've developed the capacity to implement a finely tuned, fit tax system that can adequately tax the right areas at the right time, and then make sure that those taxes benefit all the people that need to benefit from public expenditure and social welfare. So when we do look at what the motivations are or could be, here's what Research ICF could want to say as a final word. Firstly, if your motivation is to plug holes in your budget and to make more money for the government, build a enabling environment that cultivates and sustains growth in the ICT sector, given its value as an instrumentalizing force within the economy, that there are so many socioeconomic benefits and efficiencies that can be had by other sectors if the ICT sector is thriving and open and enabled and supported. That's the best way to develop your economy. And when the economy is growing and your GDP is high, you can tax at the end. You can tax corporate tax, you can maintain your personal income tax, and implement a fairly more simpler way of trying to gain public revenue. So it's about getting the policy and regulatory environment in the ICT sector correct, that doesn't stifle competition, that doesn't inhibit innovation, that doesn't stop people from expressing themselves or trying new things, and giving people the chance to make a mistake. If you're not going to try it that way, and you're rather just going to try and tax everywhere you can, take a microscope to the economy, see whoever's got too much money, point your finger at them and demand more money out of them, then understand that if you do that to someone like a mobile operator, that's just going to add that 40% tax onto their already expensive data bundles and make the user pay it. And when you do that, the people who can't pay it can't access the internet. It's as simple as that, and I think it's a very backwards way of trying to achieve that goal, that particular goal. So since that's probably not going to work, and since the foregone GDP growth and national income in the economy is going to be wiped out by trying to implement this kind of a tax measure, since you're not actually going to break even in terms of your demand lost and what you gained out of the taxes from the people who did pay, you've got to ask, well, okay, if that's not going to work, what's the real intention? What are we actually trying to achieve? And that's when we face with the question of this type of pseudo-censorship, where we don't like what people are doing on social media, we don't like what they're saying on social media, we can't actively go out and close Facebook down, we can't close Twitter or any other network or blogging sites, even though that does happen. So what we're rather going to do is just lean on it a bit heavier, and we're just going to try this sort of hard taxing form of regulation, and actually taxing form of censorship that stops people from being able to perform what governments might not like to hear. Well, in that sense, we're going to look at the demographics. The people who are doing that are young, educated, skilled, and capable and motivated and capable of getting around these types of obstacles. So what you end up doing is pushing the wrong people offline, and those who are capable of expressing dissident viewpoints are going to find another way to do that. So finally, to wrap up, it's about getting your affordability regulation correct, and making sure that your targets are achieved, making sure that the market is a space to grow in a structured environment that is not too repressive and not too punishing, and rather putting that me first mentality out and rather taking a backseat for the public good, so that policymakers can focus on allowing the economy to grow and taxing at the right point when that occasion arises. Thank you.
So I will also say that taxing the social network is not worth it. Definitely not. So basically, in most of the country, there is actually a leapfrog due to the mobile industry, and I definitely also think that we need more to focus on the regulations. So basically, you have countries where we have sometimes weak laws or not at all, and we need to focus on that aspect for the moment. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's a bit of both to answer your question. Governments want to make some extra money, but governments are also happy if they shut some people up. And one of the unintended consequences, of course, of these social media taxes is to heighten the feeling that government is conducting surveillance on us and knows whatever it is that we are going to do or say, even in secret or anonymously. So that works for the government as a double-edged sword. My last remark, though, to say that Africa should brace itself for more social media taxes. So many other countries are going to have to introduce these taxes in various forms and shapes. So as people who care about internet freedoms, I think we should think early enough on what arguments we can make against some of these taxes, what alternatives we can propose to regulators and governments that are keen on introducing these taxes. We should document, research, and produce evidence as to why it is not sensible to introduce taxes in the forms at least that we have seen them, and we should build coalitions that can be able to speak out, reach out to people who are able to take decisions on whether or not to introduce these taxes.
Sandy, I know time's tight, so I'll be really quick. How are these taxes introduced? And I hope to speak to the lady from tax who knows far more about it than I do. But these are excise duties, right, for the most part. And what are excise duties normally introduced or applied to? Cigarettes, alcohol, what else have I got here? Sugar, increasingly. Things that are essentially bad for you, that people, and there's an assumption that people can afford that and will pay. It shouldn't be applied to internet usage. It shouldn't be applied to people who are accessing OTTs. When asking yourself, is it worth it? I would encourage policymakers, all MPs as well, and I know there are some Ugandan MPs, so I'm grateful for their attendance here, to consider this. So if you're asking, is it worth it? Is it worth sacrificing the investment that comes from your existing mobile operators and operators outside? Is it worth sacrificing the freedom of speech that has helped your country get to where it is? And that is, as we've seen in some countries, a sacrifice. Is it worth sacrificing or worsening the lives of the most marginalized? And the stories of our friend in Uganda with sight problems, the issues that women have getting online, many of which we heard about this morning. Is it worth increasing those problems? Is it worth reducing digital spaces for discussion and innovation that exist already? Is it worth reducing the tax revenue that you gain from mobile operators who are increasingly selling data as part of their business model? Is it worth increasing use of virtual private networks as your citizens try to circumvent these taxes? And is it worth sacrificing your vision, as in Uganda, 2040, 2030, or 2050 by introducing these taxes? And I think those are the questions that governments need to ask. And then the other one that I've said already as well, as this global conversation about taxation of this sector continues, is it worth negating your position in that conversation by having, or by reducing the number of people online? Answer no, in my view.
Well, thank you everyone for your engagement and participation. Thank you to the panelists for taking their time to talk about the social media taxes. A round of applause. Okay, so because we've gone over time by 10 minutes, your tea break will be reduced by 10 minutes. You have 20 minutes between now and 16 hours to have your tea break and then go into the next sessions. Thank you very much. A round of applause again. You made a bad statement. Like, we know what you meant, but you...
Yeah, I know.
I think
We don't have to repeat things at the end of the panel. What we're going to start with is an introduction from all of us. I'll also read something that was sent in by one of the individuals that was supposed to be on the panel, but unfortunately wasn't able to make it last minute. Then we'll move into a discussion between the panelists, with myself asking questions. That will take about 20-30 minutes. And then we're going to move into audience questions. So please already start thinking, even now and throughout the discussions, about questions that you'd like to ask us. And then we would like that to be the bulk of the time. So that was more or less the layout of what we'll be doing. Now I'll start by reading the message from Tiffany of OK Thanks, and then we'll go through individually and introduce ourselves. So Tiffany is from OK Thanks. OK Thanks is a human-centered design team committed to working alongside users and developers in an effort to create easy-to-use, privacy-enhancing tools. For the last 6 years, they've had partnerships with the Guardian Project, Least Authority, Internews, OTF, and others within the Internet freedom community. OK Thanks was unable to attend the forum at the last minute, but they would really love to hear from you. They are currently interested in learning more about how people use VPNs. Josh Levy, a friend of theirs, is here and has a small table set up, I'm assuming right outside where there are the different materials. Stop by to pick up a flyer or send OK Thanks an audio message to share your VPN story. So there's that. And then I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Marie. I work for HEVOS for the Digital Defenders Partnership. And if you're not familiar with the Digital Defenders Partnership, we're an organization, a program that tries to help respond to digital emergency situations. So we have a grant-making mechanism. We also have a Digital Integrity Fellowship, and we host regional and a global rapid responders network for people in the digital security ecospace. So if I haven't had a chance to talk to you at the conference, I'd love to talk to you more later. And now we'll move on to our lovely panelists. And we'll start with Betty and then go down the line.
Hello everyone, good evening. My name is Betty Abba. I'm the founder of the Center for Children's Health, Education, Orientation and Protection in Nigeria. We work predominantly with young people, children and young people in slum communities, in impoverished and marginalized communities. We're basically into development of children. And one of the areas we're looking at has been in the recent years has been on online access, internet access for young people as a means of development. And we're also trying to grapple with the consequent accompanying threats to young people as well. I have a journalism background and I'm a social media influencer. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is K. Daniel Mkwano from iFreedom Uganda Network. iFreedom is a network organization, and currently we have over 30 member organizations, which are coming from LGBTIQ organizations and sex work organizations. iFreedom is an organization that promotes freedom of speech, association, and assembly through technical IT support, research, and development of tools and applications that enhance digital security. So our services are primarily targeted to our membership, but we also do provide services to other human rights defenders and organizations in the country that may require our services. So I'm also looking forward to interacting with many of you at the conference and learn more from your work, and share more strategies of how to promote a digital hygiene amongst our different communities that we are coming from. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sadi Bousso. I deal with technology and human rights at Amnesty International for West and Central Africa.
Hello, good evening. My name is James Laurent. I work with the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition in Tanzania. THRDC, or the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, works with over 6,000 human rights defenders, and we're a membership organization made up of 150 members who are individual journalists and human rights defending organizations. During this panel discussion, I look to discuss more on the subject and even learn from you guys. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for these great introductions. So we also had some discussions before the panel to think of what would be the most interesting content to touch upon. And we thought a good question to start with would be looking at what really is being online. Because a lot of what we're going to talk about during the panel is digital security and being able to reach activists really at the front lines. So I thought maybe James, even though you were the last one to speak already, if you could tell us a bit more about what you've encountered with the populations you work with in understanding what is being online and looking at the really how it's not just a web page. If you could tell us a bit more about your experience in that.
Being a trainer, a digital security trainer, from the context of like, Tanzania, when most of Tanzanian people, most of Tanzanian internet users or online users tend to believe that you're only online when you're using a browser, or you're only online when you're using Facebook, or you're only online when you're using your WhatsApp, but tend to forget that you're also online when using online transactions. Okay, so there's a bit of that knowledge gap. There's a bit of that lack of an awareness, but in general, being online is using the internet through any digital device. That can be your phone, it can be your computer, it can be your a smartwatch. Okay, anything that gets you connected through the internet. That's being online. And being offline is being totally connected from the internet. Okay, using a device that's not connected to the internet at that very moment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think in the introductions we touched upon the different areas and target groups or end users, as whatever you'd like to call it, that our panelists work with. But I think it would be interesting to go a bit more in depth and hear about, when working with such specific groups, how do you tailor your outreach? How do you look into digital security for these groups? How do you conduct your work? So I think we could start, for example, with you, Kelly, and then also have our other panelists weigh in.
I'm working with LGBT communities and sex workers. Could be a bit challenging, but it's also very fun because you then get to realize and accept that the internet is evolving. It's a very dynamic field that we work in, and so are the problems that people face. So several years ago, it used to be about cyberbullying, trolling, blackmail, extortion, and they still exist. But now we see a new wave of digital insecurities that the communities report. Nowadays, we report things about like revenge pornography, especially amongst the women population. These are communities that we serve who have been targeted as victims for sharing their pictures in confidence and privacy. So that also becomes a digital security incident. And other things to do with bullying, it also becomes a digital security incident. And this means that as a trainer of digital security or someone programs for these communities, you also have to have your minds evolving and your programs evolving to match these techniques. For example, bullying on the internet is not an issue to do with a strong password. So you wouldn't encourage someone to have a strong password. They're not going to get bullied on Facebook. With or without a password, strong or weak password, you're going to get bullied anyway, because these bullies are also already connected on this portal. So having a strong password doesn't guarantee that if you send your pictures to someone else, they wouldn't end up in the wrong places, wouldn't end up in online blogs and online forums, and you becoming a target of operation and trolling. So the techniques have to change as the problems change. Then to start encouraging communities to develop a digital hygiene, to be able to have an etiquette, so that they know that whatever I cannot share offline, I cannot share online. I think it takes communities appreciating that whatever happens in the offline world is just as real in the online world. So if I cannot go naked, for example, in front of everyone here, In as much as it has empowered us to do stuff, I wouldn't advise someone to go naked online, because whatever happens in the online world translates in the offline world. When someone is targeted as being LGBTQ online, very often we've seen these cases translating into offline real world insecurities, people being targeted and beaten offline because of the activities started online. So it takes that level of understanding and helping communities understand and appreciate and develop digital hygiene and etiquette that goes beyond the technical terms we teach, and that goes beyond VPNs, that goes beyond passwords and what, to understand that the ecosystem is changing, and so are the challenges that we are facing, and so it means also the techniques we are using have to change and have to evolve as the internet moves and grows. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And what about yourself, Betty or Sadibu? Do you have something to add about how you work with, for example, children online? I know you mentioned a bit in the introduction, but perhaps some of the challenges that you face or some of the main trends you're seeing?
Okay, thank you very much. Like I said earlier, we work with children in slum communities. And originally, one of our development plans for the children was to ensure that they have access to internet. It's still one of our major programs. But also associated with that is the risk of online safety for children, because children are very impressionistic, and most times they don't know where to draw the line. For instance, in one of the slum communities where I work, we started a program last year, and we discovered that most of the children in that community, right in the middle of Lagos, had not seen a computer before. That was the first time they were seeing a computer. They must have seen it in home movies and all of that. But many of them have smartphones, and so they have access to internet somehow. And we've had issues with children being addicted to online pornography sites, and some of them being victims of bullying. Sometime early this year, one of such young person was brought to my office, and she had been addicted to online porn. And then she was on several sites on WhatsApp and all of that. And as at the time she came to the office, she had run away from home like 6 times. And the mother had to resort to prayer houses because they believed that she was possessed by a demon, which was making her to go after men and all of that. So those are some of the implications. And then there was a story that was well publicized of a young boy who was addicted to online porn through his phone. His father runs a school in one of the outskirts of Lagos. And then he targeted one of his fellow students and subjected her to a series of rape. He was trying to practicalize what he saw on the pornographic site on the young girl, and then he threatened her, and she could not report to anybody. She was intimidated until she felt very, very sick. He had inflicted a lot of damage to her reproductive system. By the time she was taken to the hospital, she was very, very ill. That was at that point she confessed what had been happening, what the boy had subjected her to, and she died shortly after that. So those are some of the online risks that children are exposed to. They are the victims of, they risk themselves, and they also victimize other people. They become like a bully to other people. They inflict injury to other people. And we are most really concerned because most of the communities where we work with are marginalized, impoverished communities. Most of the parents are not educated, they are not computer literate. So there are no mechanisms, there's no information for them to even monitor the online exposure of their children and to put some checks. So it's a growing concern for us. And so many of these children, some of the children in the course of the online or offline attack have died in the process. Most cases are not reported. So young children, especially in marginalized communities where there's a lot of illiteracy, are subject to very huge risk.
No, thank you for sharing. So I think this comes up quite a lot in the community. First, what you were talking about, Kelly, really the fluidity between what is online and what is offline, and the fact of having to really look at both and examine things when you're trying to think of your digital security online. And also, I think what you were speaking about with the marginalized populations, like children, like LGBT, it could be environmental or indigenous groups in other geographies, this really poses a major problem in using the internet and really instead of having the negative kind of nefast consequences that you spoke of, having it as a force for good. So I think we'd like to bring our final panelists into the discussion. So could you tell us a bit more, for example, about when working with Amnesty? I'm sure you also reach marginalized communities. So could you tell us a bit more about some of the trends that you see or some of the biggest challenges that you face in your work?
Well, the training we deliver, the trainings we deliver mainly focus on activists that we have already worked with, that we know. We so far have not delivered the trainings to the general population. There are a lot of NGOs that... Thank you. A lot of NGOs that focus on that and do an amazing job training the general population on digital security and digital literacy. Interesting trends and challenges. An interesting trend that I have noticed, and that Amnesty is not, that I'm not the only one to have noticed, is often when you train people who are hardened activists who have been on the field for years and have years of experience, it is really hard to get them to change their habits. I've often faced situations where you'll meet a group of, again, hardened activists and tell them, okay, this is how you're supposed to use your phone and so and so. And they'll say, no, I'm not going to change my habits because I'm a fighter and I deal with the repercussions of my choices. So that's something that happens a lot with older generations of activists that we work with. And a challenge, a huge challenge, which often is overlooked in our field, is the threat that surrounds encryption. Governments and institutions are getting are more and more adverse to anything that has to do with encryption. There's a series of countries in Africa, for example, where most people don't know, but if you travel to those countries with a software that has encryption capabilities embarked, and you get arrested, for example, if you don't have, and somebody goes through your computer or your phone, you may go to jail. Well, it's not as simple as that, but encryption is a huge issue, because what we do when we train and when we deliver trainings to our partners is we are, the dream would be to be able to teach them how to communicate in the safest manner possible. But we cannot, because we, for example, in a series of countries, you're not allowed to deliver trainings to teach people how to use softwares that encrypt without the government's permission. If you do that, then you go to jail. So there's a lot of challenges around encryption, and that's something that we have to pay a lot of attention to.
Thanks for sharing. Is it working now? Okay. We'll just pass the mic back and forth. Henceforth. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm sure during the Q&A time with the audience, we might get some questions on encryption or communication platforms, things like this. So James, listening to what our other panelists have said, before, when we did some prep for this panel, you sent us a very extensive list of trends, especially what you see in Tanzania with the activists that you work with. So I was wondering if you had anything to add to this kind of challenges, trends discussion we've been having. And if not, if you'd like to start giving maybe some proactive tips to how you're actually able in your work to improve digital security and to help really the activist on the front line that you'll train in digital security or work with otherwise.
I think most of you have said a lot, but one more challenge that I think I should talk about is the accountability of the Facebooks and Twitters of this world. Okay, I want to talk about the privacy policies. Okay, most online users, when logging in or logging on a new app or an account, we tend to have that habit of like click next. Like when you're asked, do you agree with these privacy policies? Just click yes without reading the whole content. I mean, most of us have been guilty of that. Yes? Yeah. So on one side, I think these website owners, application owners should try to make the privacy policies as simple to read as possible. Because in human nature, most people don't like reading long content, or and most of these privacy policies have very dodgy contents. Sometimes they're not updated. I know for a fact some websites, I won't mention the name, but there's some websites that haven't been, their privacy policies haven't been updated for like 5 years. Okay, so these website owners, these big players should try to be an example. Try to go with the flow and implement digital security measures from scratch. I think that will help us, will help even other digital security trainers to simplify that whole work of imparting that knowledge. Another thing that maybe I can add, there are a lot of laws and restrictions, okay, in many African countries that tend to abuse the fact that the fact that the privacy and freedom online and what is being shared. Okay, so it's okay to say that some things shouldn't be shared, or maybe what can I say? Maybe you're not supposed to share or post something that is not valid or accurate. But using that or abusing that by imposing laws and provisions that restrict freedom of expression, that is really, it cramps down and constricts the freedom of online users. And I think we, as the discussion goes on, we'll look more into that. Yeah, so briefly, that's it.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you very much. And you actually segued into the topic I wanted to get into next. Because even with the first point you made, you were talking about the privacy policies on these websites. And of course, the recent EU privacy directive did try to force companies operating in the EU to have more comprehensible, readable, understandable for a general consumer privacy policies. Of course, it's to be seen if other continents, nations will adopt similar privacy directives. But I think looking at the work that all of our panelists do, there really is an influence of policy on the work. So I wanted to ask if there are really any policy gaps, or as James was mentioning in his second point, laws, legislation, or proposed legislation that is really damaging either to the work you do or creates issues for the activists on the front lines in staying safe. So I'll open it up to all of you. Whoever would like to, is inspired to speak first is welcome.
Okay. I'll go first. So, talking about policies and laws and relationship with digital security. So, for example, I'll speak for my country where I come from, Uganda. There are some beautiful laws on the book. For example, the Computer Misuse Act is a very beautiful law. It has the potential to protect citizens online. But again, the way it was crafted, it also has the potential to crack down on individual rights of marginalized groups, and in this case, I'll speak about the LGBT community. Very often, LGBT content online has already been termed as being pornographic content by the Minister of Ethics, Father Simon Rokodo. So anything about LGBT online, to him, is immoral and shouldn't be online. And it's using the same law, the Computer Misuse Act, that we generate this content using our computers, so we have a case to answer. And then we have another law, the Anti-Pornographic Act, which I still fail to understand up to now. So, because I believe pornography is information, just like everyone else would believe, but I also believe children have to be protected online. But if you start enacting laws that are very vague in interpretation and meaning, without providing a specifically to whom are you protecting, what is your agenda of coming up with such a Anti-Pornographic Act? Is it restricting adult consenting individuals from receiving this information? In African cultures, and like many of you here in the room would agree with me, we used to have these sexual talks with our aunties and our uncles whenever you came of age. But we are in this era, like I was sharing with you, where you don't have an uncle to run to, a singer to go to, where basically you need to run to your computer and Google and find out what's up. We are in an era in Africa where LGBT individuals, even if they had these aunties and these uncles, they cannot go and ask, okay, I am here, I'm gay, and this is what is happening to me, what can I do? And the internet is providing the platform and avenue for them to access this sexual content for their development and for sexual education. But we're enacting laws and we are passing policies that are labeling some communities' content as being illegal. And this has led to crack down on efforts by government and other actors of these marginalized communities to try and organize and use these online spaces. And then there's an activist, turned political activist, Dr. Stella Nyanzi, who was targeted for the statements she made on Facebook about the president of Uganda. I know she's very poetic in her writing, so she was writing in a poetic manner, and she's a scholar. So, but then she was easily targeted, and I believe because she was a woman, because there are other men who say things about government, and like, oh my God, it's okay. We also live with this person in this same Uganda, but they don't target it. But for Star, it was easier to target her because she was a woman and she was working with these marginalized communities. So I think the laws are present, they just have to be fully implemented, and also need as a committee to start doing strategic litigation to have some of these laws and policies off the books. Because the more we keep quiet, they just continue, limiting how individuals, enjoy their rights. And I know in some countries, their laws don't exist at all, so there's no protection. So I would rather, instead of regulating what we do online, because if we allow regulation, that's when government is going to start and take control and tell us what we can and we cannot do online. I would rather we move to enacting laws that protect individuals and groups, online, and favor a civil engagement for all of us.
Okay, that's great. Do any of our panelists have something to add?
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to illustrate by what happened a few months ago. A friend of mine in the UK wanted to carry out some kind of girl education, girl empowerment program, and so she wanted to empower about 20 girls, put them on her scholarship, which was a lot of money. And so she put the information on Twitter, and for several weeks, nobody applied. And she called me and said she was worried because she wanted to give out money to poor girls, and nobody was applying. And I told her that the people you are targeting are not on Twitter. The poor girls you are targeting, they are most likely not even on social media because they don't have access to, they cannot afford to be on social media. So that's not the best way to reach them. And so what happens is that we have a lot of laws in Nigeria, but we always say the issue is not the availability of the laws, the acts, but the implementation, the enforcement. And so we have the cyber crime law of 2015, which talks about cyber stalking and all of that. But majority of the people in Nigeria are not aware that anything like that exists. The Child Rights Act covers children, specifically the area which I work, about the protection of children online, offline, but majority of people are not aware. And majority of the marginalized population, whose children are most vulnerable, are most likely to be affected, are not aware that there's any law in existence in Nigeria like that. And even the Nigerian Communication Commission also have the child protection laws, child protection policy. The majority are not even aware. So when people become victims of cyber stalking, when people become victims of cyber bullying and all of the violations of their rights, most times they're not aware that such laws exist. And sometimes even if they are aware, enforcing their law, their rights is something completely different. It's not easy because you have a compromised enforcement agency. You have all sorts of compromise. And then people being afraid to enforce their rights. But the biggest issue has to do with access to information about the existence of those things. So it's about people being aware of the existing laws and being able to enforce their rights. So there's a lot of need to do a lot of sensitization. I think that's the biggest gap we have.
Thank you. That's very good to hear. So do either James or Sabi have something to add on either the policy gaps, implementation, or on lack of awareness about legislation or rights?
Well, Betty has talked about the Cyber Crimes Act. Well, you just reminded me, because in Tanzania we also have the Cyber Crimes Act. Actually, we have 5 regulations, online regulations, but I'll talk about 4. There's the Cyber Crimes Act of 2015. There's the Statistics Act. There's the Online Content Regulation Act of 2018. It was enforced this year. These three major acts have crippled. I also forgot. There's the Media Services Act. These 4 major acts have crippled the media space. They have crippled the civic space. They have crippled freedom online and freedom of expression in general. Just in April this year, an advocate, Leonard Kiaruzi, a Tanzanian, was found guilty of insulting the president because he had posted a statement, an indirect statement towards the president through a WhatsApp group, and it was seen as abusive, and he was arraigned to court. So in Tanzania, once you're criminalized for maybe online offenses, it's either you pay 5 million shillings, Tanzanian shillings, fine, or you're sentenced to a sentence of 2 years or less. So everyone from journalists, to lawmakers, like in parliament, the members of parliament, lawyers, everyone right now is scared. Even the opposition has been, the political space has been crippled. Everyone is scared right now. They're scared to open up, they're scared to air the views, because anytime, anywhere, these acts, these regulations can be used against you. And right now, if the situation is so bad that if you're not targeted through these regulations, then there is what they call the unknown assailants. So they target you physically. If they can't get through to you through the laws, they come physically. There are many cases of assassinations, enforced disappearances, hijacking. Yeah. So just to brief up, in Tanzania, I think in most of the Eastern African countries, I think it's also the same in Uganda, right? Yeah. So I don't know what we should do right now, because we try a lot to talk to the authorities, we try a lot, but I believe there's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah, thank you.
Silencing my voice. I think it's such a complicated subject. Gaps, I mean, it is the legislation, it doesn't have gaps. I mean, there's nothing. Legislation in most African countries is evolving so slowly that, and technology is evolving so fast that basically the laws that exist are twisted to adapt to something that the countries are not ready to deal with. Like what James said, in the region, the number of people who have been jailed for posting a message on WhatsApp and on a private group or a private Facebook group in each country, we can count, or not in each, but in the ones that in the ones that are renowned for trying to stifle dissent as much as possible, we can name probably 10 in each of those countries. So government does have a duty to fight against usage of those platforms for with negative impact. For example, fake news. I hate that expression, fake news, but fake information being shared on those platforms have a horrible impact, especially in environments where people have very low digital literacy levels, and what they see on Facebook or on Twitter or wherever, they think it's actual news. So government does have a duty to and I also don't like the word regulate, but they do have a right in trying to make those platforms as safe as possible. However, the way it's going at the moment makes absolutely no sense. So it's not gaps, there's nothing, and yeah.
Well, thank you all for those insights. So now we're going to move to the second part of the discussion, where I'm going to come down, unless there's someone to help me, to the audience. We'll take about 3 questions at a time, and then let the panelists have time to answer, and then keep doing rounds. So if you guys have questions on what we've discussed so far or on other topics, if you could just raise your hand, and I'll come and collect some of the questions. So don't be shy. Okay, 1 question so far.
Hello, thank you very much for that discussion. My question, I think, would go to Sadibou, but probably to everybody on the panel, because this was dealing with the digital safety practices that we can apply online. Oh, sorry, I'm Dr. Robert Mudhuri from Strathmore Law School, the Center for IP and IT in Nairobi, Kenya. So we're talking about safety practices that we can apply online, and like James was saying, the situation is dire because we're still talking about very covert forms, even physical threat. But I'm wondering, have we started thinking about the threat that we're facing from facial recognition? And a lot of that technology is now starting to set up in Kenya, for instance, and I know in Zimbabwe. I don't know whether we're starting to think about this, because I'm not sure we can use encryption. Like, will we have something you stick to your forehead that, you know, blurs the recognition? But it is a form of information control, and I also struggle with that definition, the term fake news or something like that. How do we start approaching this issue? Thank you.
very relevant for our discussion. So are there one or two more questions before the panelists answer this one? Okay, I'll come to the back, so it'll take 1 second.
Thank you. I'm also James Marenga from Tanzania. Actually, I just want to put the record clear from the speaker from Tanzania. I'm an advocate of the High Court, so most of those laws, actually, there's no sentence of less than 2 years. Most of the sentences, oh no, there's a problem that this regulation says when you are convicted, there's no less than. They are speaking of not less than. And the law, I mean, the few years to be convicted is 3 years, not less than 3 years, which means a magistrate or judge, for that matter, has been given a wider room to sentence you even more than the years said on the law. So it can be more than 3 years, but not less than 3 years, and the penalty the same. So there's a danger in these provisions when it comes to online contents, and I think he has been speaking on that in the other laws. So there's a danger, and I was even reading a story this morning that someone from one of the rural areas in Tanzania has been sentenced to police for only writing a message on WhatsApp. He was just giving an opinion that deputy speaker is always going to his area. She is coming from the rural Tanzania, so she's using the motorcade, as you know, making noise. People are supposed to go out of the road most of the time, and he was just giving an opinion. We know this, he's our fellow. Why is he coming all the time disturbing us? We are supposed to give the way and everything. Why not the MP of here, who is always coming, is not doing the same as the deputy speaker? Probably they are different on the authority, but he was just giving an opinion. But it is, when it comes to those regulations, he is not supposed to go to the before the bar to answer the charges. So there is a challenge.
Yes, I'm Blaise Ndola from DRC. From in my country, in DRC, there is no any law about cybercriminality in French. There is no law about that. And the law that enforced actually is the one made from 2002 and does not contains aspects like privacy, cybercrime, and so on. So I would like to ask if you can give me an advice, because I'm managing a project about ICT in DRC. What mechanism can we take if there is any violation of privacy online, for example? There have been so many journalists that lost their jobs because someone posted their nude pictures online, and those people were not arrested because it is not actually a crime. It is not actually a crime because there is no law condemning that. And in some few cases of cybercrime, that goes on to the courts. The courts couldn't find any law to use, but they just use the common laws, and the reparation will not be proportional. So I don't know if there is any other mechanism that we can use in the country that there is no any law enforced according to privacy, even for telecoms that are collecting personal data. There is no agreement between users and telecoms. I just give my data, and whatever government or intelligence services want to access to my data, they would just go to telecom and take. So what can I do, or what can we do as a civil society organization in a country in such situation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for these questions and information. So the panelists, while I'm walking back, one of you, if you have some inspiration to answer, could go ahead and get started.
Maybe I'll begin with the question about face recognition. Such a scary and interesting subject. We know that probably 90% of the IT material that is used in Africa comes from China, where this technology has been used to great effects, where facial recognition is becoming like an episode out of Black Mirror, where people are given social rankings and we just a full-on dystopia mode with what's going on there, and with the closeness of African governments and the Chinese governments and the influence that this technology could have, it will be embraced, I think, very easily in Africa. So I think that's something that we need to discuss with a lot of interest. We need to, and not wait until it's too late, because it will be an African reality faster than we think it is going to be. Luckily, apparently, it's harder to do facial recognition with black faces, so we still have a little bit of leeway. But I believe that we will be seeing in a series of African countries those technologies coming in an environment where we have so many questions. How we can't even manage the data that we have at the moment. We can't even make sure that the data is secure. So what is going to happen when we start recording all of this? Who is going to manage it? How is it going to be managed? So this is a discussion that I'm eager to have, and with a lot of, I'm very scared, but I'm also very interested. So I hope we'll follow through with something else.
Does anyone have something to add on that, or on the other question we received about the DRC and the lack of appropriate legislation?
Thank you. To answer the question from a participant from DRC, I think he asked something about what should they do? Yeah. You know, to stay anonymous is one of the way that can help hide your identity from state actors or being targeted. I'll maybe speak of two anonymizing services. You can use Write Your Private Network, a VPN, or you can use a Tor browser, Tor. It's an onion router. It helps keeping whatever you're browsing on the Tor browser stays anonymous. Your identity stays private, so you won't have to be worried about anyone knowing who posted it, and you won't be able to. You won't be worried that you might be targeted or anything of that sort. Maybe otherwise, if Kelly can add up on that.
Yeah. So before I say anything about what you said, I also want to again to point you to when you move outside. On your right, there is a table for digital security. So if you have any problem, or if a colleague of yours who is not here has a problem with their phone, their computer, their accounts, we have a desk outside. It's run by one of our partners in a Digital Security Alliance for Uganda. It's run by a DPI, Defender Special Initiative, where iFreedom is also glad to be a member, and Royal Spacer is also a member. So the clinic is already up and operational, so you can check in for your digital security needs. So to quickly respond to what has been said, and I'll start with facial recognition. I believe the problems of Africa are very unique because they are African problems, actually. They are not European problems, they are not US problems. These are typically African problems. And one of the problems you have in Africa is that we embrace things without evaluating what the outcomes would be. I know most governments and will tell you that facial recognition is here to solve to curb on crime, solve on crime and also distance and whatever you're talking about. But I also want to remind African leaders that in countries like USA where facial recognition is not being used to curb on crime, they started with their basics. They started with a DNA to solve crime. They moved on to fingerprints. And in Africa, we're not even yet, or even closer, to using DNA to solve crime. So why then do we rush to facial recognition? When in most countries, even our big data is not kept on continent, it's kept off continent. I was joking with a friend today that, do you have big data in Africa? And he was like, yes, but I said no, because the data is kept off continent, so where is our big data? So when you're still keeping your data somewhere in someone's house, why are you collecting this data? What is the security, So I think these African governments have to go back to the basics, start with DNA, fingerprints for solving crime, then slowly we shall progress and find the rest of the world. I realize the internet moves on a very, very huge speed, but African countries are moving, a little bit slowly and backwards. And that explains the absence of laws in some countries about internet activities. And also, just to quickly respond to our colleague from DRC Congo, at the rate at which African governments are passing laws about internet and digital security, about encryption and what, we've seen that the trend is most of these laws are actually not very beautiful laws that we can welcome with open arms. So in a country like DRC, or in any other country where there are no laws yet, one can as well say those people are lucky. Because us who have laws now, the laws are used to, again, limit our interaction activity online, to limit our human rights and freedoms online. So I believe, my friend in DRC Congo, if you're listening well, the grounds in DRC Congo are fertile for advocacy. This is a chance for all of us to advocate in countries like DRC Congo where there are no laws yet, so that when the laws time comes for us to pass, these are beautiful laws that other African governments can learn from and pass similar laws that are good for their people in their countries. And I have a question though, when we are talking about laws, and I was where did we draw the line? We had a situation in Uganda since last year, I think started towards the end of last year. At least 52 women were murdered. And whenever these women they were kidnapped first, the kidnappers were asking for a ransom. These kidnappers were using mobile phones to ask people to pay huge sums of money to save their relatives. But even in cases where the relatives paid money, these people went ahead and killed these women. Over 52 women died. The kidnappers were using mobile phones, and we were told in Uganda, and I saw it because I even participated, our SIM cards were registered using our national IDs. You get? But somehow, for some reason, government couldn't find the people who were using mobile phones to murder our women. So when you look at such situations, don't you now start thinking that maybe those like the Interception of Communications Act in Uganda could have been useful in such a situation where people are being murdered? Is this the time that citizens have to give a go-ahead for their governments to intercept some communications from these known numbers, because these people are calling and their numbers are not hidden? Because somehow they have to communicate with the families of the victims, and I think in some situations these laws are extremely important because they save lives. However, the challenge, like I said, African problems are very unique because they're African problems. The problem here is actually not about laws. I always like to debate with simplicity and reality. The problem is we cannot trust most of our African governments. We cannot trust the people in power. We cannot trust our defense forces to do the right thing. Some of these laws are good. For example, Interception of Communications Act would have been good in such a situation to save a life. But we don't trust our governments enough to say, okay, they only stop at curbing crime. They won't use these same laws to infringe on human rights, to limit our freedoms, So I think African governments is now the time they need to work very hard towards getting trust of their citizens. These laws are passed with the best of intentions by our parliaments or senators, whatever you have in your country. But when time comes time for implementation, again, are implemented for the worst motives. Because you cannot tell me you're going to fail to get a person who used a mobile phone to ask for ransom and they killed someone. And then you're very fast in finding a blogger who blogged about your political party. You cannot find someone who used a phone, they registered that phone with a national ID, and then you easily find a blogger. So this also takes away the trust of citizens in Africa, in our governments. Otherwise, we also have to be very careful as we are debating. Someone talked about it in the morning, where there are rights, there are responsibilities. So you cannot just, we cannot just continue advocating for anonymity online when this same anonymity is being again used by bad people to cause pain and also to murder our people. So I think at some point we need to draw a line, but also takes the government to win our trust. And part of winning our trust is for the government to do the right thing, to implement the laws with the motive with which the laws were enacted in the first place, but not use the laws to suppress voices and people who are contrary to their political views. So they should promote a culture of civic engagement like it is in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe, Betty, you or someone else, you'd like them to make a contribution?
Okay, I was going to say that Mr. Paradigm Initiative, you have to make a comment before we close the session because you work with young people and you have a lot of insights. Okay, so I was just going to also make a comment before then on someone made a comment about WhatsApp, that there was a comment on WhatsApp somewhere in Tanzania also, and the person ended up being sued by the government. I think in Nigeria it's also a big concern for people that use WhatsApp. And when you talk about the risk they are vulnerable to or open to, it may not be physical risk, it may not be physical attack, it may not even be bullying, but there's a tendency for, because WhatsApp is extremely popular in Nigeria, there's a tendency for people using that online platform to be brainwashed, to get into religious fundamentalism, and to incite violence directly or remotely. You have a lot of false news going around, and then it spreads within seconds. Right now in Nigeria, we have conflict in some of the regions. We have Boko Haram, which is like world famous, but we also have the growing crisis of herdsmen killing. And so sometimes you see people spread that kind of news and say people have been killed in so-so village. At the end of the day, it may not be true. It may be pictures from Sudan or some other places. And then it just goes around, and then people are incited, a lot of growing hate, a lot of incitement. So it's something that is of real concern. And we think that at a point people should draw a line. At a point maybe there should be some official sanction, not necessarily trying to stifle freedom of expression, but there should be regulation so that our freedom of expression does not, at the end of the day, lead to killings of innocent citizens. So it's one of the concerns. When he just mentioned WhatsApp, I say it's something that is a big issue in Nigeria. People that are online on WhatsApp, they are open to all kinds of negative influences. So I wanted Mr. Paradigm Initiative to make a comment.
Okay. Well, Mr. Paradigm Initiative can make a comment. I can come down and bring the microphone. And I think if we want to finish on time, we'll only have time for one more round of questions, but we did start 15 minutes late. So if there are lots of questions, we can do 2 more rounds and then the wrap up. So I'll let this individual make the comment, and then we can have 2 or 3 more questions. Is that good?
I mean, just a quick comment to say that the trends from the name is Ben Gashason, by the way, not Paradigm, not Mr. Paradigm. Paradigm Initiative is the organization I work for. It is to say that we have, I mean, from not just the discussion today, but from the experience, over time, we see that people copy bad examples And I think there's a major lesson there. The major lesson is that we can see in advance what can happen, and then we can prepare for, you know, that kind of scenario. So if something has been done in another country and we have seen how people have handled it, then we can prepare for it. Like the conversation we had earlier today, someone introduced Ghana and said, oh, Ghana is great, no shutdown and things like that. But the countries that are shutting down today, some of them were once praised in such a way. How do we make sure that things don't go from 100 to 0 because we haven't paid attention to the enabling environment, the laws, and one critical factor we see now, what people do when regional power blocks make decisions. We've seen that in East Africa, we've seen that in West Africa, where one country does something and other countries say, hey, wait a second, Kenya has done this, maybe we should, or Uganda has done it, maybe we should. So lessons to learn so that we can at least be proactive.
Okay, thanks very much for your intervention. So do we have some more questions? They could be about the kind of policy gaps we're talking about now. There could be about techniques to be more secure digitally. There could be questions about your particular geography. It's very wide open.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm called Jimmy. I'm the Commissioner of Cybercrime from Uganda Police. I thank you so much, the speakers, for your presentation. You triggered my mind, though I didn't want to speak today because tomorrow I'll be speaking. But I want to just talk of two aspects in my comment. The first one is, in addition to being secure online, we've also been advocating for issues to do with, first and foremost, if you have your own machine that you're using, your own computer that you're using, the question is, how much more of your private information do you post into the public diaspora? And do you take interest to understand the people you're discussing with? Because every time we know we are online, it is not the people, it is the machines. Many a times people rejoice and say, oh, you know, yesterday I was tweeting with maybe the president of USA, or I was just, you know, I was having a group chat with this very big popular person. Actually, for a fact, you were just discussing with a machine, because it's a machine talking, it's not the people talking. And then I want to comment on other two aspects. The element my colleague from Uganda talked about, the freedom. I believe that much as we want to have the freedom, like we don't have the people to consult, so we can go on the internet to find whatever we want to have, it's also healthy that we have the discipline that you have talked about, which is called self-regulation. Before you wait to be regulated by another state person, you regulate yourself, you regulate your behavior, and you're conscious that you never know that actually what you're doing one day is going to be picked up by your very own children, who will be finding out and asking you, hey, daddy, is this your photo? What were you doing? And you can explain. So we have a family, we have society where we come from, and it's very healthy that we don't just say, whatever you want, you pick it up there. Then the other issue about DNA, I think I beg to differ with my friend that actually DNA is being used in first and foremost in doing post-mortem, because most of the time you're trying to do identification of who are these people. Instances where there has been collapsed buildings, instances where there was a dispute on who was at the scene of crime, and you pick certain pieces or you pick up blood, you use DNA, and for a fact it's being used. The fingerprints now, the advance of it is the use of the automatic fingerprint information systems, which have been used by some countries here and there. And then the other bit is the digital forensics that is now coming out stronger to help you to identify who did what, when, and how. Now the only point is that, do we have standards in place that can help, first and foremost, our own states to protect us, but not look at them necessarily that actually they are going to use some of these technologies to clamp down on the liberties that are therein. Of course, I don't rule out the fact that there are sometimes excesses, there is misuse. And this is where we need to come out and strongly advocate and speak out and say this has been misused. I, for a fact, have seen those scenarios, and I would think it's a good platform that we underscore such scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I have a question here and a question here. So I saw this gentleman's hand first, and then I come to you.
Okay, so my name is Olumide. I'm from Nigeria. Mine is not a question, it's a comment. I didn't even want to comment until I looked at the objective of this session, and I saw the last line has to do with support. And the part that struck me was the legal support. And I've looked around. I'm not sure we have up to 10 lawyers for this event. And almost everything we've said would one way or the other dovetail into legislation or litigation or something that has to do with the law. And we've always been talking about collaboration. I think the organizers would do better for the next, the subsequent editions, for lawyers to be involved. Now, coming to the Nigerian experience, Benga is here, so he knows the fight we are going through, trying to get some of these legislations, some of these repressive legislations to be struck out or declared null and void by the courts. But sometimes it's difficult when there is a legislation in place. A lot of bloggers, a lot of journalists, a lot of internet users now, they have suffered series of incarceration by the instrumentation of these laws that were passed in Nigeria. One was passed in 2015. And there's another one that they were advocating to be passed to weaken the the hardship of the other one. So I would say that the legal support doesn't start from when the thing happens. So we've heard of internet shutdown in Cameroon. Someone just like Minga said, Ghana has not had such experience, but they could take a leave from the countries that have had experience. So it's better from the inception, when the laws have not come into place, when you see that the government is making moves, that's when we all need to work together, lawyers, policymakers, journalists. It has to be a collaboration, so that where you guys are doing the advocacy, where you are doing the noise making via the press, via all the channels, lawyers are doing the litigation, or lawyers are even threatening litigation, so that all these things can come into play. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. So I see a question over here, and we can maybe do one more, since one was a comment, and if not, we wait for the next round.
Thank you very much. My name is Makwami from Ghana, a member of the Editors Forum. I just want to correct one impression before I ask my question. Before the 2016 election, the tension was very high, and the then IGP said it's likely that people might use the social media to create problems, so they will close down the social media. It took, not that we don't have problems here, but it's the way we handle it. 2016, just 2016, the IGP says it's going to, before the election, they will close down the social media. And the various civic society took the matter up, including the media. So they have to backtrack. And the president was also forced to come back. The president said, oh, nothing like that will happen. So it did not happen. If we have sat down, they would have closed down the social media, and one didn't have known what would have happened. Not that nothing has happened here, but it depends on the way you go about it. And again, my lady from Nigeria, when you introduce yourself, you preface your introduction about you working with children, and then you talk about Nigerian having the Children's Act, which I believed is carved from the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child, which specifically says that the child need to be given information, but must be given the right information, and also give you that those information that would be injurious to the child must be prevented. But everything that must be done must be to the best interest of the child. And you also alluded that it looks like many people don't know about the act. I just want to find out from you, what is your relationship with your media? Because one particular thing is that anything on children, because issues on children don't sell, except where they find themselves to be on the wrong side of the law. What are you using the media for to ensure that you the advocacy in this area
is wide open. Because if we are not careful, we'll be sitting here as adults discussing this thing, but the very hardest hit in our society are the children. If we are not able to protect them from access to wrong information, well.
Thank you very much. Is there a final question? Because afterwards I think we'll move on to a quick look at future trends or next steps and final words from the panelists. So is there any other questions from the audience? Okay. If not, I think we can get started on answering the questions or replying to the comments here. And then, like I said, we'll ask all of the panelists about very quickly about the future and about their final comments. So does anyone have a response to some of the questions or comments we received? For example, the one you just heard?
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Like I said earlier, our initial, as an organization, our initial work or programs was to ensure internet access for children, but we're seeing the accompanying crisis of the danger that children face being online, cyber stalking, cyberbullying, addiction to pornographic sites, and all the negative impacts on their growth, on their personalities. So it's for us slightly a new area, and like I was telling my colleague earlier today, we're trying to start an advocacy that will ensure that the various laws that we have are implemented. It's not as if we don't have the laws. The Child Rights Act provides for the protection of children. The Cybercrime Act provides for protection of vulnerable persons, including cyberbullying, and the National Communications Commission has a specific child's online protection policy. But like I also noted, they are not implemented and people are not even aware. So it's now a position to ensure widespread awareness, especially for parents, teachers, caregivers, to ensure that as much as possible, children are protected. It's not an easy thing because you cannot be around children 100% of the time. But as much as possible, they are protected. And one of the areas to ensure that children are protected also is to ensure that people who violate the rights of children, the safety of children online, are punished. We have pedophiles, all kinds of people, cyber bullies targeting children. If they are publicly shamed, punished, to serve as a deterrence and for other potential criminals, so to say. So we believe that it's our duty to ensure that we focus on that and make it like a national priority. Because if the children of today are damaged one way or the other through their own undoings or through what people do to them as a result of their exposure to the internet, then the future is endangered as well. So it's something that should be made a priority. And as activists, it's our role to ensure that the policymakers see it that way. The stakeholders, the people in the educational system see it that way, that children are given as much protection as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Maria, and I'm glad that someone is from Uganda and is in a position of authority. So I hope most of the conversations you're having here and recommendations from the planet are being taken. You know, where I grew up in Uganda, we used to keep birds in cages. I've never seen those birds kept in cages. The moment you set that bird free from that cage, it flies as if it is on the 7th heaven, not minding about any danger, thinking that all the danger is left behind. And those are the people who have been oppressed for a long time offline. Those are the people whose voices have been silenced over time. So with the invention of the internet, these people now have a mindset that all is well on the internet. They believe they can do everything they want on the internet. And I think the onus is upon all of us in these who come to these civic spaces, these conferences, to go back and tell people that all is not well. You know, when you set a bird free from the cage, one problem is solved. It's no longer a prisoner of the birds. But it doesn't even understand that someone can easily stone it down and it dies completely. So I think I need to tell our people that in as much as we are in this place advocating for their freedoms and their rights, again, they have a responsibility. They have a more responsibility to know how they interact with these new technologies, with the internet and these other ICTs. To understand that, for example, and I'm also a parent, and I was talking to her before we came for the panel. What does it benefit a person, a parent, to post their naked children online? We all know the internet doesn't forget. These are the children who are going to try to contest for MOP in your village. And you're going to be a very proud mother who is feeding your child because these pictures are going to come back. The internet doesn't forget. We are creating a very huge digital shadow for our children and for ourselves. So we have to be very mindful of how much content are we putting out there. Can you take your child, for example, in Uganda, we have the State Square, I think the most busiest part of Kampala. Can you go and raise your child for the entire world to see at State Square? So if you cannot post it online, because anything online is as private as a billboard you passed by when you're coming to this or to that billboard. That is how private the internet is. And also in the line of being a parent, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Uganda for the children. There's what we call the Child Online Protection Program, which was developed by the Minister of ICT, NITA, those are government entities, with help and input from civil society, and specifically Internet Society Uganda chapter was very keen at developing this. You know, we want our children to learn and explore their bodies, to have these sexual conversations that they cannot have with us. But like I said earlier, I believe pornography is porn for the right audience. But I also believe we have to protect our children online. So having such programs protecting our children online guarantees our future as countries, but also as a nation. So I think, and like someone already said, African governments are very fond of copying bad things. So I think it is high time our government started copying good things also, having such programs. That they have one in Nigeria, we have one in Uganda, that protects our next generation online. There was a session before lunchtime in this very room talking about violence against women online, but who knows how much violence happens to children online. We let our children open up Facebook accounts that we cannot monitor. We even encourage them to have stronger passwords. We give our children mobile smartphones and they are free to download whichever application. They go and download adult chat rooms and they put them on their phones, and you don't monitor your child's phone, and you bought this child a phone. But there are settings on these smartphones. If, and again, I ask those of you who are interested to go to our desk. I'll be outside after here and throughout tomorrow and Saturday. There's a way you can set up your phone. It has a safe side for children. So that when you hand down your phone to the child, that child will never access this dangerous content. They're using the child safe mode. And as a parent, you can turn that to the other mode and use your phone free as you want. Also, there is the Google Child Search Engine. I don't know if someone has heard about it, but I'll be glad to share about this more when you find me at the desk outside. So when you buy your child a laptop, which is very good for their development and ensuring they have successful careers in the future, you install this, the Google Search Engine for children. They will never be able to see this dangerous content online because the search engine is there to only produce information. Then you set it how old your child is, which age bracket, so they know what content this child can and cannot access, other than leaving them to just can't access the internet anyhow. And then, instead of using a modem, I would advise parents who want to protect their children online to use Wi-Fi in families. So there's a way you can set your Wi-Fi and block some content and regulate what and how much your children can access while you're using that internet. Otherwise, it's a little bit tricky with modems. They can access everything. And if they have that on their phones, again, they can access everything. But I believe we all have to protect our children, but this doesn't have to be used by governments, again, to regulate how much adult consenting individuals can access. We know these topics are a little bit scary in Africa, sexuality and everything. This is not something you just talk about on breakfast, like I've seen in some other cultures of continent. These are very individualistic things that individuals need, especially like to go and explore and try and understand. So let's protect our children, but let's not in any way limit adults from accessing this content, because God knows how this content has been helpful to some other people.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we've actually run over our allotted time, so I'll go ahead and ask the panelists if they have any. Of course, you can respond to the questions if you have something else to add, but if you could just give us a final kind of feedback, final wrap-up of what you've thought of this panel or what you'd like to share with the audience. So maybe if we could start with you, James, and just come down the line, and just please be a bit quick since we want to let everyone leave more or less on time.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Okay, I would like to add up on Kelly's comments and also on another colleague from Uganda, I believe from the Uganda police. It's true what you say that as online users, we also have to know how to regulate our behavior online. Okay, and also what Kelly said is you refrain from posting online or sharing online what you wouldn't do offline or in public. Okay, maybe I would also jump on some of the things that we should, as online users, refrain from doing. Refrain from sharing obscene content or pornographic content. Refrain from using abusive languages online, refrain from sexual harassment, cyberbullying, body shaming, refrain from breaking the law online of any particular country you're residing in, and just be careful and not to trust everything that's out there online, because most of us have a tendency of trusting things online to be legit. For example, one of the phishing tactics or a hacking tactic that is used by hackers, and remember, hackers are really smart. Okay, you find a login page that, for example, Facebook's login page or Instagram's login page looks very, very authentic, but if you're not careful, you may be getting into a trap. So as much as we're talking about being careful, we should also invest in getting to know the trends, the vulnerabilities online, and what are the latest tricks online that can get you in trouble. Maybe I should also jump into trends. Is it okay?
Is it okay, audience, if we keep going a bit? Some nodding or some shaking? Okay, I heard a yes.
Okay, I would like to, as much as we're saying that nation states or governments crippling the freedom of speech, freedom of expression in countries, I would also like to commend their efforts. Okay, for example, in Tanzania, through the Tanzania Regulatory Authority, TCRA, and the Tanzania Police, online theft has been diminishing since these acts or provisions were imposed in 2015, but since 2016, crime online has been diminishing. For example, in 2016, there are reported cases of online theft, about 3,233 cases, but in 2017, they had gone down to almost half of it, by 1,063 reported crimes. Another major problem in Tanzania, though not much talked about, but there is ATM fraud. Okay, banks and the police always issue warning to customers that beware of ATM thieves and conmen. In 2016, there were about 260 ATM theft cases, but in 2017 they had halved to half of it. So as much as would like to say like these provisions, these laws are making life hard for online users, but on the other side, the crime rate is also going down. Having said that, I think that's all. Maybe if the rest of you want to.
I'll interrupt quickly in case more people go out, but thank you all for staying, and you actually get important information since you're here to the end. The cocktail tonight will not be here. It will be at the hotel next door, the Labadi Beach Hotel. I think it's at most 10 minutes walking, and the program says it's at 6, but it will actually be closer to 6:30. But please still stay to hear our last 3 panelists.
Okay. Yeah. So I also thank all of you for turning up for our session. And my message in closing is simple. If you can't post it offline, no, if you can't do it offline, don't post it online. Rights come with a responsibility that we need to acknowledge. And that's exactly why I love being a digital security trainer. Because then you move away from being an activist, human rights activist, and then not that I don't do a good work there because I was worse one, but again you start looking at issues more objectively because I understand what puts your people in danger. So instead of just advocating, you also start seeing where the lines should be drawn and start appreciating the importance of some of these laws and policies. But otherwise, thank you very much, and I'll be available to assist. My colleague from Defenders Protection Initiative, Brian Biarohanga, is right outside on the table. We shall be glad to assist you with your digital security needs, and in areas of protecting your children online, that area interests me a lot. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank the audience, all of those who asked questions. It was really, for me, very interesting to moderate the panel. I think a lot came out about kind of the fluidity between online, offline spaces, about reaching marginalized populations, about trends. We did talk about the future with, for example, or near future with facial recognition. So I think we touched on a lot of topics, and I, for example, would be very happy to continue speaking with people afterwards, and I know the colleagues would as well. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. We'll see you at the cocktail.